Okay, hey everyone. So, this introduction for The Great Gatsby is kind of two parts. The first part, I'm going to be asking you to look at some specific cover art for The Great Gatsby. So, this is a widely read novel across the world, but it's a very famous American novel specifically. So, we're going to look at a few different covers. The first one you're going to see is the one that it was originally published with, and the one that the author F. Scott Fitzgerald signed off on. So it's the one that he knew was going to be published with his story. So I think that's the one that's most important to take a look at first. So we'll see that one. We'll see a few others. I'm going to ask you on Flipgrid to have a conversation, in a sense, have a conversation about these covers. All right, so that'll be the first part. And the second part of this, I'm just going to explain a few things about the 1920s that I think are important for your background as you go into the first couple chapters of this book. So I know that you looked at the other video that gave you sort of a widespread view of the 20s from John Green, and a lot of that is really helpful. But I just want to talk about a few specific things also. All right. So, first up, as I mentioned, is the cover art that was originally published with this book. So, take a look at this first. Just get a feel for it. Basically, what I'm going to ask you to respond to on Flipgrid is, what do you see here? So, literally, what do you see? What kind of colors are used here? What do you notice? What images do you notice? What stands out to you? What kind of atmosphere do you think is being portrayed here on the cover of this book? We might say, don't judge a book by its cover, but a lot of times there are things on the cover that kind of give away or hint at what we're going to expect in the actual book. So take a look at this. What do you predict this story is going to be about based on what you see here in the cover? All right, so I'm going to leave this up on the screen just for a minute so that you get a full minute of. Obviously, you can pause the video also if you want to take a look further. But in your Flipgrid response, the first part of it, I'm going to ask you to talk about this particular cover. What images do you see? Colors? What do you notice? Etc. Okay, just to zoom in a little bit more also, this part, a lot of people notice the eyes. They kind of draw you in. Obviously, there are other things going on also here, but the eyes are also something important and something interesting. They're referred to as the celestial eyes, so they kind of look like they're in the stars, but it also draws you in because it looks like maybe there's something else in the eyes as well. So feel free to talk about this in your response as well. What does it kind of look like are in the eyes of this person on the cover? All right. So that's your first part. Second part of what I'm asking you to do on Flipgrid, and I'll go through these kind of slowly. I want you to pick one of these other covers to talk about. So there are 8 options. Like I said, the book is popular across the world. So some of these are actually from other countries. You'll see different languages. And they all have a different view of the story. But I want you to do the same thing as you did with the first cover. What are your predictions? What do you notice based on these covers? All right, so just choose one. Here are the first 2. Right, they're all numbered up in the right-hand corners. So here's 1 and 2. Then you have 3 and 4. 5 and 6. Kind of a similar look between these two, but slightly different. And then 7 and 8. All right. So choose one of those 8. That's going to be the second part of your Flipgrid response. The instructions will be on there also, but just this is the video to accompany it. All right. So that finishes the first part of this video. Moving into the second part of this video, I just want to talk about 1920s America a little bit. Again, I know you probably have a little bit of backgrounds, but to give you the visual of what you kind of want to be thinking about while we're reading this story, this is the image that really predominates the 1920s. So the flapper image. To us, this doesn't look scandalous at all, right? Seems like her hair's short, so what? You can see her arms, okay. The dress really isn't very short to us. But for the people living in the 1920s, to go from what it previously was for women, which would be covering all the way down to your ankles, to even showing this part of their calf of your leg was pretty scandalous. So this is a big difference from previous times to now when you think about the fashion and the women and just what was going on in the 1920s. Right. So when you think of the women or when you see these characters, this is kind of what they look like. Just to give you a little bit more, again, you learned in the other video that the wealth was very stratified. Really high highs in terms of the upper class and then really low lows. This just gives you a visual kind of the upper class and what was going on there. You can sort of notice that some of these women, especially the older ones, are still dressed more covered, right? Whereas some of the younger women are starting to dress a little bit differently, but not completely. All right. So the upper class took a little bit longer in terms of that. Right. So you get that idea. Jazz was something that was big. So when you see parties and when you hear them talk about music, that's what you want to imagine. Here's another one to show you this upper class, right? What you're going to see in the first chapter. Daisy and Tom Buchanan, two of the main characters, and really Nick, who's the narrator also, are part of this upper class lifestyle. And so this is what you would imagine they would look like, right, if they were dressed. Again, the flappers, right? There are some other characters who are probably more in this look. Some of the women, right, you'll see in the book. And then the other really important thing to notice or to remember that's happening during the 1920s is prohibition. So the government decided, sort of pushed by certain people in the country, that they were going to make alcohol illegal. All right. So that set off a chain of events in many different ways in terms of what happened after that. So this is some of the alcohol that they discovered that was being made in the basement here, that was being taken away by the police. That's one of the things that ended up happening. People made their own alcohol, bathtub gin, etc. And then the other thing that ended up happening was that mobs or the organized crime families in the United States sort of grew from this because they also were able to bootleg alcohol and sell and gamble. All the things that were illegal had a rise during that time. All right, here's another example of, the alcohol being taken away by the police, all this bootleg alcohol, meaning illegally made, illegally distributed at the time. So someone who would make that would be called a bootlegger. And people made extraordinary amounts of money doing that during the 1920s illegally. And so it wasn't necessarily seen as a good trade, but people were making a lot of money doing it. Right, and here's another example. What you also found at the time, even though it was illegal to buy alcohol, you would end up having people in these illegal, basements, speakeasies, as they were called, drinking lots of alcohol. And so this is an example of the people at the time, in these speakeasies still drinking, even though it was illegal. Here's a picture of one of the versions on film of the Great Gatsby, so you get to see some of their, attire and what it would look like at a party scene, right? So I wanted to give you kind of a visual of that also. When you see Daisy Buchanan in the first chapter, this is the newer version of the film, newer version of the book on film. You can see kind of what she looks like. This is an older version of Gatsby, the main character. All right, so just to kind of give you a visual in terms of what they say they look like, you should make up your own mind, but this is the narrator, Nick, Daisy, Tom Buchanan, her husband, and then Gatsby, right, played by Leonardo DiCaprio in this version. All right. And then that's a real picture of what Daisy Buchanan might actually look like if she were a real person at that time. All right, so not too much more than that. Just wanted to give you a little bit of background and some of the actual history that's important to the first couple chapters. All right.